Ontario's announcement this morning is responsible and necessary. We will continue working alongside all partners to get the situation under control. This morning, I had a direct call with President Biden to talk about our shared challenges at the border. I updated him on the situation, particularly in Windsor. We discussed the American and indeed global influences on the protest. We talked about the US-based flooding of the 911 phone lines in Ottawa, the presence of US citizens in the blockades, and the impact of foreign money to fund this illegal activity. President Biden and I both agree that for the security of people and the economy, these blockades cannot continue. So make no mistake, the border cannot and will not remain closed. I want to remind everyone that politicians don't direct police in a democratic society, but I can assure you that the RCMP is working with provincial and local police departments to enforce the law. Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end, and it will end. Of course, I can't say too much more now as to exactly when or how this ends because, unfortunately, we are concerned about violence. So we're taking every precaution to keep people safe. But the absolute safest way for this to end is for everyone to return to your communities now. If you're still participating in illegal blockades, you're hurting your neighbors. So it's time to go home, especially if you have kids with you. But we are a long way from ever having to call in the military, although, of course, we have to be ready for any eventuality, but it is not something we are seriously contemplating at this time.
New York City native Eddie Gibbs this week was sworn into the New York State Legislature, representing East Harlem, the neighborhood where he grew up in public housing. And as far as he knows, he is the first person elected to that body who previously served time in prison. Gibbs said he was in awe when he first stepped into the chamber of the New York State Assembly.
I still can't describe it, right? Just walking in and so I took those 2 steps and I just stood there, and God understood the severity of it, and he's like, take your time. Take your time.
Just before his swearing in, he recalled wondering if he could ever shake the stigma of the manslaughter conviction he caught over 30 years ago.
Sold drugs, 14, 15 years old, in this community. Being in a gang, making money was a great thing, right? For somebody who grew up in poverty, somebody who grew up hungry. And so you didn't think about repercussions back then. You just made money and you were happy. But I was also a target by a lot of people.
Gibbs was 17 when he shot and killed a man who had attacked and attempted to rob him. He then spent about 1.5 years in the city's notoriously violent Rikers Island jail complex before pleading guilty to manslaughter, and then about 3 years in prisons outside of the city. Gibbs said his past shapes his legislative priorities, including making it easier for people released from prison to re-enter society. Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the U.S. Senate, was among the prominent New York politicians to speak at Thursday's swearing-in.
And instead of the criminal justice system doing what they're supposed to do, nurture people, they didn't. But did Eddie get angry? No. He has such a good heart, he said, I'm going to do better for everybody else, so people don't have to go through my experience.
Gibbs appears to be pulling through on that front. Lakora Prince Okeagu is an activist in Harlem.
He has got people together, blacks, whites, Puerto Ricans. He has introduced us to all the politicians, and he has supported us in funding, and we love him.
Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end, and it will end. Of course, I can't say too much more now as to exactly when or how this ends, because unfortunately we are concerned about violence.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Friday said quick action would be taken to enforce the law against anti-vaccine mandate protesters disrupting Ottawa and blocking vital trade routes like Ontario's Ambassador Bridge, North America's busiest land border crossing, and a choke point for Detroit's car makers.
I want to remind everyone that politicians don't direct police in a democratic society, but I can assure you that the RCMP is working with provincial and local police departments to enforce the law.
Trudeau promised U.S. President Joe Biden quick action too. The leaders spoke by phone on Friday. According to the White House, Biden expressed his concerns over plant closures and auto production slowdowns due to the hampered border crossings, as protesters and their vehicles continue to block nearby roadways. Trudeau on Friday told protesters to leave, but stopped short of calling on the military for help.
We have to be ready for any eventuality, but it is not something we are seriously contemplating at this time.
An Ontario judge granted an injunction to end the blockade of the Ambassador Bridge starting Friday evening, after the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association told the judge the obstruction has cost Canada's auto industry hundreds of millions of dollars. Earlier in the day, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford declared a state of emergency and threatened to fine and jail protesters if they don't go home.
Fines for noncompliance will be severe, with a maximum penalty of $100,000 and up to a year imprisonment.
The so-called Freedom Convoy protest, launched by Canadian truckers opposing a vaccine or quarantine mandate for cross-border drivers, has blocked two other, smaller U.S. border crossings and is occupying areas outside government buildings in the capital city of Ottawa. Its scope has expanded to include a more generalized opposition to the government's COVID-19 restrictions.
How to end the convoy? You got to end the mandates. You got to end the mandates, and personally, I want Trudeau and whoever's pulling Trudeau's strings pulled, gone, out of Canada.
As police faced protesters and handed out tickets to truckers Friday, Trudeau again called for an end to weeks-long blockades in the streets.
We've heard your frustration with COVID, with the measures that are there to keep people safe. We've heard you. It's time to go home now.
Ones are hand knitted, yeah.
Чому ми робимо? Бо це наша країна.
We do it because this is our country. Who else can help our army if not us?
Хто ж допоможе нашій армії, як не ми?
Pseudoніми, tak, żołnierze. Jest napisane na przykład krymskie.
Tam mnogo.
Поділіть на час війни.
When we first came here, we were really impressed how many people were here. And all these people just dedicated their own time, their efforts, and also some money, because many other things have to be bought here. Nobody just gives them for granted, almost nobody. And actually, I was really impressed, and me and my wife thought that we just can't stand aside. Former diplomat now. I don't have anything to do with it all.
Wall Street stocks ended sharply lower on Friday for the second straight session as investors fretted about deepening tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The Dow dropped 1.4%, the S&P lost 1.9%, and the Nasdaq finished down 2.8%. With investors already worried about inflation and rising interest rates, selling on Wall Street accelerated after Washington warned that Russia had massed enough troops near Ukraine to launch a major invasion and that an attack could begin any day. But Christian Ledoux, director of investment research at Cap Trust, says a conflict would likely bring little disruption to the U.S. economy.
Russia and our response to Russia really won't have too much economic impact to the United States. They're not a large trading partner with us. Europe is, and Europe could be damaged to some extent with a protracted conflict with Russia. But I think more investors are focused on inflation than that situation in the Ukraine.
Among Friday's movers, Under Armour slumped 12.5% after warning that its profit margin would be under pressure in the current quarter due to supply chain issues. But online real estate platform Zillow jumped 12.7% after beating Wall Street estimates for quarterly sales, boosted by an 11-fold revenue increase in its home segment. Wall Street's latest sell-off follows a slump on Thursday when data showed consumer prices surged 7.5% in January, the biggest annual increase in 40 years. Comments from St. Louis Fed Bank President James Bullard about aggressive rate hikes have also rattled investor sentiment. For the week, the S&P fell 1.8% and the Nasdaq shed 2.2%.